Moving on, I see a whole lot of comments about the meadow and the wildlife. Save the elk, save the moose. We don't want to take away their birthing spots. We don't want to interfere with their migrations. I know CPW did a whole study and provided you feedback. Tell me about that.
Let's talk about the meadow.
Yeah, I think we could start at the base with the meadow. You may have, if you drive that road, you may have seen signs that say "Save this meadow," and a lot of social media posts "Save this meadow." They're going to destroy it. The truth about that is, it's not our meadow. The majority of it is not our meadow. There's only a small sliver. So if you're driving down Shadow Mountain Drive, you're going across a meadow for a while. We only have less than 10% of that meadow available to us. We don't want to develop that whole thing. We're only going to be doing what is necessary and try to site our infrastructure outside of those wetlands as much as possible. So we're not destroying the meadow. Most of that is private land that's just not ours. One of the recent posts out there was a moose in a pond and saying, look, this is going to be torn away and the moose love it here. It's like, first of all, that's not our property. Second of all, we don't want to destroy their natural habitat either. We want to do what we can to mitigate our impacts wherever we possibly can. And we are working with CPW to do that now and when this becomes approved and we start developing infrastructure and trails, and et cetera. Just from a straight up mitigation factor, but also education to our visitors on what to do with interactions and what places to avoid and so forth. So there's a lot we're going to do with that. But I lost my train of thought. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, yeah, wildlife is a big question. I mean, I think just to state it blank, like we're not saying we're going to have zero wildlife impact. Nothing that gets built does, and anybody who lives in a home up here or a neighborhood that's been built in the last 10 or 15 years would acknowledge that yes, while you might see wildlife, they probably used the property differently than they do now that your house and your road and your neighborhood are there. So I think we're not denying that there could be an impact. Jason makes a very good point. The perception that we're going to be destroying this massive meadow wetland is completely off base. We have it's I think 7% roughly of that meadow is where our infrastructure would actually be, and the remainder of it is privately owned. But when you think about how do you effectively mitigate interactions between visitors and wildlife, how do you design and site your infrastructure so it makes the most sense for the wildlife that do use the property, you look to, first of all, industry experts, many of which we're working with, and then on kind of the state side of things, CPW is who we're probably talking with the most, and we'll get into a little bit more about that relationship and things they've said about the project, because there's a lot of talk about that. But you also look at other recreational assets, how they're designed, and what does the wildlife interaction look like, right? So if you use any of we've talked about the public open spaces in Staunton quite a bit that are in this community, you see wildlife, right? So it's not as though you introduce trail users to forest and wildlife disappear. Their use of the property may change, and you have to work hard to make sure that you impact that as little as possible, but it's not as though you put people on trails and wildlife run away. We see a lot of examples of that in this community. I think one example that if you haven't spent a lot of time there, I would encourage you to, because I think it's very similar to how wildlife might end up leveraging our property, and it's a beautiful, fun place to go where you see wildlife, is Evergreen Lake. So if you haven't been there, I would encourage you to go, but it's just, you get on 73 or take Brook Forest, go over into Evergreen, and you're going to see a nice, beautiful lake, and you're going to see a visitor center type building that is very similar in size to what we're proposing. You're going to see parking lots that are very similar in size to what we're proposing. You're going to see a lot of visitors, and you're going to see a ton of wildlife, right? Elk, moose, deer, all sorts of things. There's a golf course right there that I'm very familiar with because I'm effectively a volunteer there because I love to play golf and I love to mow grass. There's a lot of wildlife going on, and there's a lot of people leveraging that property. They do a very good job, right? And also Three Sisters open space is also right there. So you have Three Sisters, you have a golf course, and you have Evergreen Lake, and you have a lot of different user groups doing different things in all those spaces, and there's a ton of wildlife. And they work very hard to mitigate those interactions. I mean, I've personally been a part of putting up signs, letting golfers know, hey, you know, elk could be present on this part of the course today. Keep an eye out, keep your distance, these things. So, thankfully for us, while we can't say that the bike park will have no impact, because that's not true of anything that gets built anywhere. What we can say is that historically, there's a pretty healthy relationship, or there can be if it's done correctly, between people recreating in outdoor spaces and wildlife being able to enjoy those spaces as well. And that's going to be our goal. And Colorado Parks and Wildlife is probably the most serious authority in the state, right, when it comes to informing us on that, and we're having a very open dialogue with them. And you may have heard, because we've heard it recently, CPW gave them these recommendations and they're not following them. That's a very incomplete description of our conversation with them and our relationship with them. I mean, first I would want to say that the people that work at CPW are amazing and they do very good work and they're smart people and we very much respect them. Like anything that gets built, right, there's different stakeholders involved, and very rarely does CPW's exact recommendations overlap with exactly what ends up coming to reality. And that's not just true of bike parks, that's true of state parks or open spaces or anything that gets built anywhere. The goal is to get as close as possible, right? So, you know, probably the most concrete example of that is CPW recommended that we not operate at all for essentially half of the year, or a little more, because potentially wildlife could be using the property for different things. Obviously, like anything you'd be building, recreation or otherwise, we can't adhere strictly to that for just because it doesn't work for the business and for the visitors that want to come and use the space. But we've committed to a 3-month seasonal closure during the winter. And then we've also committed, and this is all in writing, to work with them on ad hoc closures, right? So in the event that there is wildlife using the property for something that visitors shouldn't be around for, maybe it's elk calving or something like that, just like we talked about with closing seasonally for unseasonable weather or whatever it is, we'll have the ability to either manage visitors away from that area of the park or close entirely if we talk with CPW and it makes sense to do that. So we're not in any way saying, oh, we're building a bike park and wildlife can kick rocks. It's how do you create a blend that makes sense? I don't know.
Yeah, that was actually the second part of my train.
It's a long trend.
It's a long train.
Wildlife is a big topic. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of examples of where people are recreating and wildlife are still present, and we think we can achieve a healthy blend there.
So you see the elk riding a bike down the hill, do you?
We do see them hanging out in our base here. We're actually, and I'm not saying CPW endorses this view, but we're actually a little more concerned about potentially wildlife coming to the area rather than running away from it, because once you've one thing wildlife prioritize is safety, right? And knowing that, currently you can hunt on that property if the State Land Trust will give you a permit for it. So it's not as though it's a protected wilderness where wildlife are just using it and there's absolutely no threat. Could be natural predators, there could be literally humans as predators.
We
ran into a hunter.
hunters on adjacent properties.
Yeah.
Actively.
So, once wildlife figure out that a place is safe, and I think Evergreen Lake is an example of that, it's not uncommon for there to be an increase. And I'm not saying CPW is saying that build a bike park, it's going to be also an elk viewing center, but we're actively planning to, how do we manage that if that is the case, that wildlife figure out this is a safe place and start to leverage it more.
I think another point to the wildlife and the property in general is the other fact of what else the property could end up being and what it isn't and what it is perceived to be today. So there's a lot of people that have thought that this is a state forest or a protected wilderness or public land, anything in that kind of category, and it just simply is not. It is not protected. It's not even public. So we've had people tell us that we've been hiking on this property and now you're going to close it off to us and we can't enjoy it, and that's actually, they've been trespassing this whole time. And that's an issue that we're trying to overcome, is getting the information out of what this property is. It's not public. It is private land owned by an entity that's supposed to be generating revenue off of it for public education in the state of Colorado. And we think that a trail network, right, the majority of the property is going to be a trail network, is a really responsible way to maintain the land the way it is as much as possible. Because the potential alternatives, you can go on the State Land Board's website and just look at the types of developments they've done. It could be mining, it could be logging, it could be housing, it could be a whole host of things. The most likely that we think it could be is housing, right? That's 300 acres on prime real estate in Conifer, Colorado, 25 minutes from Denver. Why wouldn't a developer from Houston, Texas come up and buy that for a bunch of money and build as many as homes as possible, right? And we think that even just that scenario, which is the most likely, would be a much more detrimental impact to the wildlife than what we're proposing. Because we have active management, we have seasonal closures, it's trail networks, it's not clear cutting. So we think that's the best case scenario for this property that's supposed to be making money off of something.
Yeah, and people may be out there wondering, because I can envision myself living in a community where I'm near a large parcel of land and I'm coming to learn that it could be developed, and I don't want it to be developed. And I would start thinking about what avenues could I go down to prevent that, and I think conservation would come to mind, right? How do we purchase this property or work with the landowner in some way to make sure the property doesn't get, developed? And maybe you're thinking a conservation easement or something like that. And we've heard narratives in the community that there's plans to do that, or that is possible. Obviously anything's possible, and we're not speaking for the land trust, and anybody who's listening or watching this, I would encourage you to contact them, because they're awesome and they're easy to talk to and they can really dial you in on this stuff. But at a high level, I think one thing that everyone should know is that there have been efforts to conserve this property. So probably the most concrete example of that is the Land Trust has a conservation designation, actually. So while they are a revenue-focused organization and the majority of their properties are used to generate revenue to fund their trust, they do have kind of a subsection of their properties that go into what's called a conservation designation. And that doesn't actually prevent them from getting developed, it just puts more guardrails around what can be built. But there was a nomination of this property led by folks in the community who you might be familiar with who have concerns about the project, to move this property into that designation, which would have not necessarily prevented the bike park from being built, but certainly would have put more governance around what the property could be used for. And that effort was unsuccessful. And there's a lot of stakeholders that are involved in making that decision, because when a property gets nominated for that conservation designation, the land trust gets to weigh in, any relevant agency at the state or local level get to weigh in on whether ultimately the property makes sense for that, and it was decided that it does not. And then there have also been, during the journey of our project, private efforts to purchase the property from the land trust and conserve it and these types of things. And there's a lot of nitty-gritty about how land trust property sales actually work, and that's largely the reason why a private owner buying it to put it in a conservation easement is again, anything's possible, but not a likely outcome. And those efforts have been made, and obviously the project is still going on. So I guess what we're trying to say is, while we very much understand the reaction to seeing something you've seen for a long time change, we would also encourage you to really educate yourself on who the property owner is, what their mission is, and what could happen to the property, and understand the efforts that have already been undertaken to do some sort of conservation effort with the parcel. Because I think those really would give you a context on, from our perspective, why our proposal makes a lot of sense. So.
Have other lands in the area been state land board trust lands that have been sold and developed?
Yes, that's actually a really good point as well. The state land board, which was founded when Colorado became a state and entrusted with all of these pieces of land throughout the state, they used to own over 30,000 acres in Jefferson County alone, and now possess less than 3,000. So you can actually take a look at the maps on their website and see where all of those disposals are. Some of those are very close, actually, a lot of them. They're all throughout the county, right? They've lost over 28,000 acres. Some of those are actually right next door, like directly adjacent to our parcel. If you look at the map of where we're citing this, and you can see that on our website, you can see that on opposition website, you can see it on state land board website, wherever you want. It's kind of a funky shape with kind of a few disconnected pieces. But that actually used to be one giant square that has sold off various pieces to now current homeowners or landowners. And so that's another factor of why we think someone coming in and buying that out and developing as many homes as possible is a likely scenario, because it happened right there, and right there, and right there, and right there.
We could overlay a map right now.
We could overlay a map. So yeah, that's a good story to tell. Is like it when it makes sense, they will sell the property when it benefits the trust the most and makes sense for the property. And in our view, that is a likely scenario. And on the current zoning, which is A2, you can look it up, it's currently 10-acre minimums. On 306 acres, that's a minimum of 30 homes, no questions asked, right? So again, depending on the discipline you want to kind of draw that back to, we were recently talking about wildlife, a minimum of 30 homes covering that land, clear cutting all those areas, roadways, then all that traffic that's year round, blasting Alan Jackson off your deck at midnight.
Big windows with lights.
Right, big windows with lights, which
Water.
a lot of people in Conifer have. There's a lot of impacts to the wildlife that we think are more detrimental to the wildlife. Not even talking about other disciplines like water usage and traffic alone, evacuation, other things as well. So.
In essence, your project will also help support public education, because you are only leasing this land, correct? Not buying it outright. So you're going to be giving money constantly for as long as your lease lasts back to the state land board.
That's correct. I think the land trust in aggregate in Jefferson County has put almost 17 million into the county over the last, call it 15 years. And Conifer has directly benefited from that. So that's a cool narrative as well, is that their mission kind of aligns with ours in terms of how do we responsibly use land, but then also the money that we contribute to them goes right back into the county and the community we're in. So that's cool. And Jason's point about how the property's owned, obviously any developer who potentially got their hands on the property as in a purchase and went to develop it would have to deal with Jefferson County. But there's a parcel of land that used to be part of our parcel that was sold off, and a home property was built, and that's only 5 acres.
That's true.
So that's an example
It's
of,
actually a couple.
yeah, so that's an example of what was 10 acre minimum being cut down to 5, and that's literally a former portion of the property we're proposing. So, and yeah, and like you said, us being the leaseholder, it benefits the land trust, but also as long as we're the leaseholder, the community is going to see value in that, from a forest management standpoint and all of that.
Getting back to kids. So your park is open to mountain bike riders of any skill level? You just want people who know what they're doing? Do you want families? How young do you want them? What are your plans for that?
Anyone. That's the short answer. But
The young, the old.
yeah. We want to create a culture with this park that's encouraging and is a safe space to develop skills as a rider, and really encourages that sense of loving the outdoors, and finding something that you love. This one in particular is with biking, but it could be anyone, any age, any skill level. Part of where we started was realizing that there was a gap in dedicated bike infrastructure, and part of that is dedicated bike infrastructure that helps to develop skills in a safe, curated environment. And that's what we aim to do here. So everything from a kid getting on a Strider bike and starting to get the feel of going over some rollers, getting a couple inches of air, maybe a little 1-footer or something, all the way up through like a pro level rider in an awesome space where people can just work their way up, see other people learn those skills and go, okay, I can do that, without the fear of being miles out in the wilderness on trails that aren't really designed for biking, that could be more dangerous than they should be for a rider. And that prevents safe skill development and perpetuates injuries in the wilderness further. So we're trying to mitigate all that by making this unique experience that's just a better riding place for everyone.
Yeah, that's super well said. And the interest, and people might be out there thinking, oh well, they're saying it's gonna be for everybody, but it's not, or whatever. When you look at mountain bikers, and you from a market research standpoint, the majority of riders are not expert riders, right? The majority of people fall into the beginner and intermediate category. And that's not just true of mountain biking, that's true of any ski. Sure, there are some ski areas that are more intense than others, but generally speaking, the trails lean green and blue. Are there trails that are more expert focused at ski resorts? Yes. Are they the majority? No, because that's not the majority of riders, right? And that's also not how you create a culture of people who come and learn with you and grow with you and stay with you over time, right? You don't bring families into the sport of mountain biking to be lifelong customers by putting their 7-year-old on extreme trails. That's not how it works. So if you go on our website and you actually look, we do have a conceptual trail map, and there are some expert trails on there, but you'll notice that of the roughly 13 miles we have proposed, it skews heavily towards beginner and intermediate. And one part of the experience at our park that will be different than if you've ever tried downhill riding at a ski resort and were like, that's not for me, maybe it was because you kind of went into a rental shop, got put on a bike, maybe a helmet was shoved on your head and you got sent up a chairlift and you were like, right? What we're trying to do is bring people into the sport. So there's going to be a lot more focus around lessons, camps, programs, skill development before you ever even get on the chairlift if you're not somebody who's done directional riding before. So it's going to be a very different experience than I think people might have it in their head. Downhill mountain biking's rowdy. Like Jason said, it can be. There are expert riders out there. Jason and I used to be. We're probably more blue guys now than we were 10 years ago. But that's,
Just ask his ankle.
yeah, right. So yeah, I think we're really excited to bring all sorts of different people into the sport. It's not just going to be a place for experts to ride.
Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about that you haven't said yet?
Do you want to take a look at your list?
Yeah, one thing that I've heard a lot that kind of sticks in my craw is, that people moved up here for the solitude and the quietness, and we're going to destroy that. And that's just not true. We're largely keeping the property the way it is, except for mitigating it for the major fire risk that it is today and bringing it into a healthy state. But other than that, it's day use, seasonal bike riding, right? So that nighttime, that dusk, like we're looking at out this window right now, serenity and calmness and peace and, hearing a babbling brook, lulling you to sleep, like that doesn't go away. We're not destroying all of Conifer. We're not even destroying 300 acres of Conifer. We're actually kind of improving it and making it safer and more enjoyable. Actually enjoyable, period, because you're not supposed to go on it today. But just that thought that we're going to be destroying this sense of serenity just isn't true. It's day use, right? We don't have bikers out there at night. And we're not destroying any rivers or babbling brooks or the forest. So I really hope that message gets more received.
Tell me about the chairlift. How loud is that?
The chairlift, that's a great question. I would implore you, if you haven't, to go stand near a ski resort or even on the property and see if you can hear a chairlift. Because you really can't until you're underneath it, right? And those aren't even the newest, greatest, quietest ones out there. So we're planning to go with the newest, greatest, quietest technology available. And that one in particular, I believe it has 74 decibels under a max load inside the terminal. So like you're standing next to the motor. That's huge, right? And it's only 74 decibels. And if you look at scales of that, that's basically like a Prius driving down the highway, right? It's very quiet. There's videos of people, with this company standing in the terminal having a conversation at the same volume we are right now with no issues. And again, that's inside the terminal. And the way sound works is it's every so distance halves that decibel level. And so even standing underneath it, you'll barely be able to hear it. And then little by little as you get out, you won't be able to hear it at all. And that's a large misconception that you're just going to be hearing this buzzing chairlift and people
Screaming riders.
Riding, yeah.
That's a great, yeah.
Is another good point, but chairlift is very quiet. The rider screaming thing, there might be some riders that might hoot and holler every now and then, sure. It could even be me once we get the trails built and I actually get to ride them. But you again, it's a factor of distance first of all. That it goes quieter and quieter as it goes through. There's trees to buffer, but also if you look at it from what people complain about a lot today on trail networks, is that riders are coming fast and they're so quiet that they can't hear them and they startle them, and then there's an issue and a panic and yanking the dog off the trail, and it's a whole kerfuffle, right? And so that makes me ask the question, okay, are riders loud or are they too quiet on trails, right? We think they're very quiet. And there are studies that agree with that we didn't do, right? That experts did in their fields that provide that information.
Yeah, I mean, riders in the aggregate are so quiet that Staunton started a bell program several years ago where they're handing out bells, encouraging riders to make noise to not interfere with people dog walking or hiking or whatever it is, which, you know, as much as we love to be scientific, you can also use a little common sense and say, okay, if there's hundreds of thousands of people coming to Staunton and they're handing out bells, do we have a noise problem or a quiet problem? And I think it leans towards quiet. And Jason's point about serenity, you know, if you're an evening person who likes to do whatever it is, your glass of bourbon, your martini, I'm a Vesper martini man myself, you know, you're still going to have that. If you're a morning coffee person, we don't open till 9:30, 10 in the morning, right? And it's just our staff that's there. So I don't think you're going to be sitting on your deck enjoying your morning coffee being like, oh man, Phil and Jason are just making so much noise down there. It's like, no, they're just going to be in their office getting ready for the day. Feel free to come down and say hi. But
no AC/DC blasting.
no AC, no AC/DC blasting. That's actually an interesting, not to get on a rabbit hole, but we can't do that. So if you're wondering, you know, they're going to have speakers outside or these different types of things. So that's all regulated by Jefferson County. And there's a lot of language to it, but effectively we've committed to like no music outside, other than if we needed to make an announcement in an emergency scenario or something like that, we'll have the ability. Like you asked earlier, how would you notify riders? Obviously the staff, but we'll have a network of, you know, speakers that are there for an emergency case scenario. We can get on the intercom and be like, anybody who's on the hill, get off now type stuff.
County approved, of course.
Yeah, county approved. Right. So yeah, barring an emergency scenario, you might have to put down your morning coffee or your martini, but you're evacuating too, so hopefully that's not a disturbance. So one thing, this is a question that I got. It doesn't come up all the time, but I think it was probably one of the best questions I've ever gotten from a community member. And it was, we hear a lot of the stuff that you and Jason say, and we read your stuff that's on your website, and we read the pieces of the application that we can get through. and then we read what other people say about your project, right? Because there's other websites out there and there's other information. And it's like, how do we know who to trust? And I think the answer to that is think about whether the information you're consuming has been reviewed by people of authority qualified to review it.
Who have no stake in the project.
Essentially, it hasn't been peer reviewed, right? Because everything Jason and I do, we do not have the luxury of inventing or skirting the truth or producing things that are, you know, misleading. Like, we can't do that because everything we produce, first of all, is public record, right? Anybody can read it. And second of all, is highly scrutinized by people at the county level and the state level, and in some cases the federal level, by people who have no stake in whether our project get approved and whose job it is to evaluate these disciplines scientifically. So everything that we say and produce is tested by a process in a way that other things may not be. And if you're going to go as far to say, oh, well, I don't trust Jefferson County or I don't trust the government, that's its own rabbit hole, right? So I can't help you with that. But, you know, I mean, Jason and I, if this stuff was easy and the level of scrutiny on what we're doing and what we're producing was not extremely high, we wouldn't have been at this for 4 years.
Right? Somebody else would have done it already.
Right? I mean, we started this project 4 years ago. Think about that. And we still don't have permission to build it, right? And so if you're questioning, are the things these guys saying true? Is the science they're producing real? It is, because it has to be. And I'm not saying don't listen to other people's opinions or anything like that. I'm just saying that the work we're doing is vetted and tested in a way that other things that are produced about the project are not. And I'm not saying that should make up your mind. I'm just saying that might be an interesting way to start to think about who do we believe about traffic or wildlife or natural resources or forest fire or these different things.
Yeah, I think you put that well, is look at who is approving this information and evaluating it. But the other part to that is look at where this information is coming from. It's not coming from us doing just desktop research. You know, we have our own day jobs. We're not environmental scientists. We're not traffic engineers. We're not wildfire scientists, etc. Right? This information is coming from independent parties that cost a lot of money. Whether the results come out favorable to us or not, they don't care. They're still getting paid for the study no matter what. So it's as unbiased as it can be, and it's coming from professionals in their fields, and then it's going to the county and state and federal departments, whoever it is, to then evaluate it and make sure it's correct and accurate and is fitting for this area. So it's hard for me to come up for an example that's more trustworthy than that, right? That's just as unbiased as it can get, right? No one involved in producing these studies or evaluating them has any stake in whether we succeed or not. If they did, this would have been completed a long time ago.
Well, I mean, how have you
Yeah.
paid for these studies and all of this work to get to this point?
Well, if I pull my wallet out of my pocket, it might fly out the window.
Right, yeah. Yeah, seriously. Yeah, so there's we've heard it in the community, so some people must believe it to be true. That Jason and I are, what's the craziest thing we've heard?
Millionaire corporate developers from New Jersey.
Something like that, yeah.
That was one.
We have no affiliation with the state of New Jersey.
Zero.
It may or may not be a great state, I don't know. But the origin of it is pretty simple. Jason and I set out on to do something that we had no understanding of how much it was going to cost. And the first year was largely business planning and market research, which kind of fell into our wheelhouse as professionals. So that was done by us. So that was free. But then, but then we obviously found out, once we started talking with Jefferson County, the level of detail we were going to have to provide to actually bring this project to, to hearings or to get it approved. At that point, we realized this is hundreds of thousands of dollars. This is not, you just, Jason and I don't come from the types of families that could just be like, hey, the boys want to build a mountain bike park, here's $500K, ha ha ha. That's not our situation. So we had to take the project to market and get people that we didn't know to invest in it, which was made challenging for a variety of reasons. Getting people to give you money for something that could be denied is hard in general. But when you do things like commit to not having a bar and a restaurant, commit to not building homes or hotels or hospitality or the types of things that could kind of anchor a recreational asset like this, like if you look at a ski resort, yeah, there's ski resorts, but they're also there's a huge real estate angle to that. That's kind of a safeguard against bad weather or things that could happen. If you have a down season, you still sell martinis and condos and all that type of stuff. With us, not like that. So to get investors for this was challenging, frankly. It was probably the thing that slowed us down the most. It was probably the hardest thing we've done through the whole process. Thankfully, we were able to find some passionate individuals in Jefferson County who see the value in this, who understood what we were trying to accomplish and the issues we were trying to address. And they, funded us, is a simple way to put it. And we're very thankful to them. I'm sure they're watching, making sure we don't say anything to screw up their investment or something. But yeah, I mean, that's the origin of it. Like, this is not a corporate-backed takedown of a small town from some weird place. It's just none of that is true.
Yeah. So here is the truth. We grew up in New Hampshire. Life happened. We made our way to Colorado. We're 33 years old. We are not corporate backed or anything like that. Our daddies aren't funding us. We didn't just graduate college and our parents are just like, here you go. This is as grassroots as it gets. And thankfully we have had some local Jefferson County support to get us to this point so far.
Yeah.
That's the raw truth.
That is the
If you want to know more, we'd be happy to sit down and have some beers with you at Snowpack or, another local spot.
This project would have ended 3 years ago if it wasn't for people in Conifer. And if you drive around and you see signs that say stop the bike park or this and that, you might get the perception that it's like the community of Conifer versus Jason and Phil, and we're on an island, and that just like could not be further from the truth. I mean, the amount of things that people have helped us with, because we have a ton of knowledge gaps. Like, we're smart enough guys, we have business backgrounds, you know, we're not doofuses by any stretch, but like Jason said, like, we're not experts in every discipline. And the people who have rallied around this project to help us along the way have been incredible. And they're people we did not know. Like, the only connection is the project. And so watching the team grow and expand to include people who we never would have met if it wasn't for starting this and them seeing value in it is like, it's hard to describe the impact that has on you, you know? It really makes you want to succeed.
Yeah.
But seriously, I mean, whether it's people tangibly helping out or actually joining our team, or it's just people offering encouragement, you know? Like, the amount of times people have, early on especially, when we were just like, you know, whatever. I mean, we were just learning a lot about what we were going to have to do, and it was very overwhelming. You know, the amount of people who were like, hey, I know there's people saying no, I know you guys are up against a lot, but like, don't stop, what is largely the reason we're still here.
Yeah, that's well said. It's the people that have come out of the woodwork to support the project that may not be as loud publicly as those that might be against the project. It's just been incredible, and insanely supportive, and has really kept us going. Not only obviously do we have a passion for it, but feeling the passion through others makes us want to build the park for them as well, and do this for the community that we have seen that have reached out to us.
Yeah. I mean, if people don't think there's been days where we're just like, oh. There are. I mean, anybody who's trying to do anything from scratch or start your own thing or whatever, it's an absolute slog. And if you don't have people around you who are supportive, keeping you going, it's very hard. So we're super thankful for that. And maybe, I don't know if this is a closing thing or if it's just like one more thought, but like, the idea that there's for the bike park and against the bike park, like, we don't really see it that way. It's a conversation about Conifer, right? And what's right for Conifer. It's not, if you actually like get away from whatever, the Facebook chats or whatever it is, and you like, this is actually a conversation about like, what do we think is the most appropriate thing to do with this land in this area? And some people see it one way and some people see it another way. But in the end, we're all trying to achieve the same goal, which is make Conifer an awesome place to work, live, and play, and enjoy yourself, and do the best, most responsible things we can with the land we have available. Jason and I think we're going in the right direction on that. Some people think we're not. That's okay. No matter if we succeed, it's not as though it's like we don't want to talk to anybody who thought this was a bad idea. It's actually quite the opposite. It's like, we're joining your community. How do we, you know, bridge that gap and partner with each other and make sure this works for everybody? So we don't, or at least we try not to see it as like for or against, because that's depressing. Discouraged.
Jason, anything you want to say?
Yeah, I think that was well put. Yeah, it comes back to, we see this as a benefit to the community, and we do think the more information that gets out about the project, more people will see it as a benefit to the community as opposed to a detriment. And we want to be part of this community. We're not corporate-backed New Jersey developers coming in to just make our bucks, right? If we wanted to make bucks, we could have gotten into crypto and, you know, bought GameStop and sold it. You know, there's a lot of different ways to get rich quickly. This is not one of them. This is very much a passion project for us. And we've put a lot of effort into it, and we've talked to a lot of community members about the right ways to go about everything that we're doing, right? Like I mentioned earlier about the traffic numbers, you know, like we started with 1,000 cars and we brought that way down. We cut that by, 70%? And there's a number of other things that we've added into the application as well that we're going to do that we've learned from community feedback of like great ways to adjust the project to be a better fit for the community. So we're excited to be part of this community and continue to be a part of the community and a benefit to the community going forward for hopefully as long as we're here.
If anyone has questions, how do they get hold of you?
They can get our emails is probably the simplest. Jason and Phil at shadowmountainbikepark.com or you can go to the website and fill out the form there at shadowmountainbikepark.com. Those are probably the simplest. That form goes to our info box that we answer. So we're happy to talk to anybody about anything related to this project. We always have been. We've tried to be as transparent as possible, and we'll continue to be that way. And we love meeting the neighbors, so we encourage you to reach out.
Yeah, if anyone's wondering how do they get involved, because we actually get that quite a bit. People will email us and be like, how do I help, or how do I support, or when are you opening, how can I volunteer? It's actually really cool. But the simplest way right now is, like, we're working as hard as we can to get the project shovel ready so that everyone can come out and build trails and do all the fun stuff. But right now, the best thing you can do is vocalize your support with the county, because that's ultimately, Jefferson County is making this decision. So if you go to our website, there's a support tab, and it lists all the different county commissioners. So depending on the part of Jeffco you're in, you probably live in Conifer or unincorporated Jeffco if you're interested in this. So Leslie Dowkemper would be your commissioner, but her email is right there. We even have a click to email form, so it just kind of like will populate it in your email for you. And that's sending an email to the county. There's language on the website, but if you copy our planner, he gets enough press, so I won't use his name, but it's all right there. If you copy him and Leslie and just say briefly why you'd support the project, that's probably the most tangible thing you can do. And then we have a mailing list where we send updates about the projects. You can sign up for that. And we also, our social media is not particularly exciting. Jason and I are not particularly exciting on social media. We need to work on that. But we do have an Instagram, we have a Facebook. If you follow us on there, you get project updates. And then when our public hearings happen this summer, we'll notify everybody when they are. And attending those and showing your support, wear a bike helmet or something, is very valuable, because that's the place where the commissioners will actually physically see the support for the project. So right now, that's probably the best thing you can do. And then if you're on our mailing list and you're following us on socials and whatever, when we actually do start construction on the park, you'll know when you can come out and volunteer and have fun and do all that stuff too.
Awesome. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us.